Hey comic book lovers, thank you for tuning in to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at The Palace of Tears Part 1, which is an indie comic book written and illustrated by Michael Lomon. So I'll give you my thoughts on the comic in general, and then a few things that have some Christian implications that we can apply to our lives. So let's go. Never open the box. Jamil Slugbait the fisherman always did have a habit of doing the wrong thing, at the wrong time, to the wrong enchanted prison of unspeakable eldritch horrors. Over endless sands, enchanted lakes, and floating palaces, our hero faces a deadly game of survival when all he really wanted was a decent catch for supper. Welcome to Pages of Light, where we analyze and review literature from a Christian worldview. If that sounds like something that you're into, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell down below so you don't miss any new videos. So The Palace of Tears is an indie comic that came out in October of 2019 in print, but I think it recently just came out in digital format on Comixology, which is why I saw it in the new releases section. And after following the link that they have in the back of the book, I realized that this is actually a web series that has another page released every few months, with the most recent page being released in July of 2020, which is actually stuff that's happened after this first part that we're going to look at today. So this looked like an interesting read, and I think it's important to support indie creators, so let's get into this comic. Alright, so I've broken this comic into 3 different sections, and this first section I'm calling The Monster Unleashed. So we're introduced to Jamil, who is a fisherman, and he is, out on the water fishing with his nets and just trying to catch some things for his family or to possibly sell at the markets later on. And when he pulls up his nets for one of the times, he uncovers this ancient little box, almost kind of looks like a jewelry box. And he doesn't really think anything of it, but he hears like a muffled voice on the inside, so he decides to pry it open with his little knife that he has, and out comes this massive sea monster. And it kind of reminded me of the scene from Aladdin, where we have this small little lantern that Aladdin rubs, and then this massive genie comes out here to grant him wishes. But this isn't a genie who's coming out to give him wishes. This monster is bent on destruction. So Jamil is pretty scared of this, obviously, but he convinces this monster to talk to him and answer a question before he goes off and eats him or destroys the world or whatever the sea monster is going to do. And Jamil asks him how he came to be trapped inside this little tiny box, because he's such a massive and powerful sea monster. So the sea monster tells him this little story of a witch who summoned him because she wanted him to resurrect someone that she loved. And the sea monster could kind of do half of her request. She could resurrect his mind, but she couldn't resurrect his body. And so the witch thought this was unacceptable, and so she decides to imprison him in this little box. As the monster is talking, he mentions that he can take any size that he wants, again similar to kind of the genie idea, where he can be really massive or he can shrink himself down into something very small. And so Jamil asks him if he can display this power so that Jamil can be sure that he's as impressive as he says that he is. And so, the monster, trying to, be very powerful and display this, he decides to shrink down into a very small little creature that's actually inside this ancient box again. And Jamil, he finds out that he's very clever, and so once the monster is very small back in the box, he just smashes the box back together and re-traps the sea monster back into this little box. And so now he is able to kind of talk to the monster through the box, and he says, "I'll let you out, but if I do, you're going to have to make me very, very rich." So in this section, we have Jamil using this sea monster for his own personal gain, which is something that we can do with God in our own life. Sometimes we want to try and make a bargain with God, and we say, God, if you help me out in this area of my life, then I'll give this part of my life to you, or I'll dedicate the rest of my life to you, or I'll dedicate, the next month of my life to really focusing on what you have for me. But this isn't really how we should be thinking about our relationship with God. This idea of God constrains him to our own goals and our own imaginations. And he is so much bigger than that. He is all-powerful and infinite. He knows what we need before we even ask, and he knows what is best for us in our life, even if we don't know what's best for ourselves, and even if we think his path is the wrong one. In the Bible, we see an example of Satan tempting Jesus and trying to make a bargain with him whenever Jesus is in the desert. And so we read in Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 1, he says, "Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread.' But he answered, 'It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God.' Then the devil took him to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone.' Jesus said to him, 'Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test.' Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, 'All these I will give to you, if you will fall down and worship me.' Then Jesus said to him, 'Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve.' Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and were ministering to him." God is not someone that we can make deals with. His will be done in our life, whether we are along for the ride or if we are dragged there kicking and screaming. God always wants the best for his creations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your life will always go according to your own plan or that your life will always be good. Sometimes a trial is what we need in life. And so our decision is, are we going to submit to the will of God in our life, or are we going to pursue things that are contrary to his will and the Bible? This next section I called Pride Comes Before the Fall, and you'll see why in just a few moments. So we have this sea monster who realized that he's been bested by Jamil by his little trick with the box, and so he decides, yeah, sure, why not? I'll make him rich or whatever. And so the sea monster shows Jamil these exotic fish at this, I guess, secret lake that he can fish, and he can catch them, and he can go and sell them to the Sultan for a really good profit. So that's what Jamil does. He releases the sea monster, and he goes and catches one of these fish, and he goes to the Sultan, and he gives him 40 pieces of silver, which is, I guess, seems like a lot of money for only one day's work. And so on his way home, Jamil witnesses some kind of ritual happening. There's a bunch of people in this big crowd that are going to this place called the Scar, and they're going to, quote, feed the flame. And it's not really explained what this kind of thing is, but it looks like some kind of religious ceremony where they're feeding this god. And Jamil thinks that they're fools to be participating in something like that. In the next scene, we get a picture of Jamil's home life, where he's with his wife and his two young children, and he's counting all of the money in his hand, and he's thinking of all the things that he's going to be doing with it. And his wife isn't really that impressed with it. She's just like, bring me something home to eat other than fish for once. And she also mentions this old saying that her nan, or like grandma probably, would tell her, which is, easy money tends to runny out on you. And then the next day, we have Jamil going back to the Sultan. He caught some more fish in the morning, probably, and he goes back there and he sells him these fish. And the Sultan asks him where he's getting these fish, like he did the previous day, actually. And Jamil, he can't reveal, because obviously if he gives up where the fish are, then everybody will be able to get them, and he won't have any competitive advantage, as it were. And so the Sultan's not very happy about this, and so he decides to just arrest him and take him to prison, because he thinks that he's conspiring with unholy spirits, or maybe the Sultan knows something a little bit about these fish, that maybe they're supernatural in some way. And so on his way down to prison, he's being talked to by these other people that are also in the prison, and they say, we tried to convince him with precious jewels and promises of power, or carnal favors even. In this section, we can really see the pride of making this money go to Jamil's head. He makes a little bit of money from the Sultan, and he doesn't really think about any ways that he can help other people. All the things that he thinks about are related to himself. So nothing about his family or how he can help his community in any way. And even the way he got the money was done in a deceptive way. He had to trick the sea monster into giving him this information that would help him get rich in some way. So, getting money in a deceptive or dishonest way will usually lead to destruction or going to prison. Jesus, of course, talks about money in his famous Sermon on the Mount, found in Matthew 6. And starting in verse 19, we read, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." At the end of this section, we see the scene with the different prisoners talking to Jamil and telling him about the things that they tried to win the Sultan over with. So somebody says precious jewels, somebody says promises of power, and somebody says carnal favors. And so these three things are some of the main trappings that non-Christians or people of faith can fall into: power, money, and sex. And these things aren't bad in and of themselves, but the desiring after them and lusting after them above God is what makes them so bad. This last section, I titled it An Unexpected Escape, where we find Jamil in the prison, and he finds out that his prison is infested with rats. Of course it is. And so he tries to act ferociously and scare off the rats. And he thinks it's working, but in reality, there's actually a woman who's standing behind him who is actually the one scaring off the rats. And this mysterious woman, she's got this interesting headdress on that has two horns and skulls and jewels on it. And she's like surrounded by light and these like little particles. They look like maybe balls of light or something like that. And so she's walking through the prison cell and cutting holes in the wall, essentially. So she'll walk through it and there'll be a hole in the wall. And then when she walks past, then the hole will reclose up again. So of course, Jamil takes this opportunity to escape his prison cell. He follows this woman, but he first has to go over to the little table and get his little knife that one of the guards confiscated from him. And so he's following this woman, and they get to one of the rooms where the Sultan is and his bodyguards, and they're cooking up. They're about to start cooking the fish. I don't think they started yet. And one of the guards remarks that it's happening again. So it seems to imply that this is something that has happened before, and they are familiar with this woman in some way. Maybe it hasn't happened recently. Maybe it was a long time ago. But then in this scene, we also get the only words that the woman speaks in this whole comic. And she says like this little poem or little song to the fish. And it says, "Fish, fish, why do you bake? Return to the stones that weep by the lake. If you wish it, we return. Better to live with sorrow than to burn." So she's obviously going to be saving the fish. And so after she says this poem, they kind of like wake up and float up, and they kind of fly and they follow her like these other particles of light are doing. So as they're walking, the Sultan is yelling to his bodyguards to use their like powerful elements or the magic that they have. They have the blessed water and the cursed flames. And so they're trying to like throw them at this woman. It doesn't really do anything though. And she just kind of keeps going. And Jamil is able to navigate the room and escape with the woman. And so they're going throughout the city. They're being chased by different bodyguards and soldiers throughout the city. And eventually they are both able to make it out of the city. And then in the final scene of the comic, we have the woman going out into the desert. She goes on top of this hill-like area, and she pulls out one of the horns from her headdress, and she pricks her finger, and a little drop of blood goes onto the sand, and the ground starts to shake and rumble. And then, out of the ground appears this massive monster of some kind that is created out of gears and electrical wires and machinery and all of these different things eclectically kind of conjoined to make this really massive kind of monster. And that is where the part 1 of this comic ends. So in this last section of the comic, one of the interesting things I saw were the bodyguards using the blessed water and the cursed flames to try and stop the woman. And this made me think of the scene in Exodus where Moses and Aaron are before Pharaoh, and the Egyptian sorcerers are using their own kind of magic to try and show that they're just as powerful as God. And so we read in this story in Exodus 7, and I'll just read part of it from that in verse 8. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, 'When Pharaoh says to you, prove yourselves by working a miracle, then you shall say to Aaron, take your staff and cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent.' So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron cast down his staff before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers, and they, the magicians of Egypt, also did the same by their secret arts. For each man cast down his staff, and they became serpents, but Aaron's staff swallowed up their staves. Still Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said." Now, I don't want to compare the woman in this comic to God, because there's clearly a difference, because she's using blood magic and different things like that. But this scene can just remind us that how we can be like Pharaoh in different situations, and we can think that it's our own power that is accomplishing things and not the power of God in our life, or that our power is just as powerful as God's power, which is what we see in Exodus. The Egyptian magicians think that they're just as powerful as God. All right, there's some other interesting things in this comic that aren't necessarily like Christian related, but just things that I noticed in the story about a comparison between the sea monster and the powerful woman, because they both have similar like head dresses or head features. They both have skulls on there and horns and jewels, and so there's definitely a similarity between the two, or they're related in some kind of a way. So we see also in the story that the sea monster tells about the sorcerer, how she uses blood magic. There's like a sacrifice that she used to summon the sea monster. And then we also see at the end of this comic how the woman uses some kind of blood magic to summon this different monster. So there's some different little clues there that may point to this woman also being the same person and sorcerer who summoned the sea monster way long ago. But we will have to wait and see to find out all of the answers in the next part of this comic. It's certainly a unique comic with interesting setting and story, and the art is actually really well done. I'm impressed that he's actually writing the comic and he's also doing the art. That's probably why it takes him so long to kind of do this, and there's only a new panel in the little web series. Comes out once every few months, because I'm sure it takes him a long time to do all of this and do it in a really good job. I'm certainly looking forward to the second part of this comic, which it says in the back is coming to print in 2022, and hopefully it comes to digital form at Comixology soon after that. Alright, that's going to do it for this video. If you liked it, please hit the button down below, and also leave me a comment about what you thought of The Palace of Tears Part 1 if you have read it, and also let me know about some things that you noticed, maybe some Easter eggs or things you thought were interesting from a Christian worldview perspective. Alright, thanks for watching. Make sure to keep reading and to share the gospel with somebody this week.